beautiful people, what is up and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jamila and I love all things beauty. I love all things makeup. I love all things skincare. And I especially love sharing my tips and tricks for how to find high-end and luxury beauty products at bargain prices. If that sounds like something you're interested in, I would absolutely love if you'd consider subscribing and joining in the family. Okay, so by popular demand, because I asked you all in my community tab if you wanted me to talk about this, we are going to be talking about private labeling in the makeup beauty space today. I was really hesitant to talk about this to begin with because I feel like everyone has an opinion and some people feel very strongly about their opinions. But, you know, in a lot of recent videos, a couple of you guys have asked about private labeling. What does it mean? What does it mean for you as a consumer? How can you know if something's private labeled or not? And have asked me to create a video just talking about it because I have sort of alluded to it and mentioned it a number of times in previous videos without really getting into the weeds of private labeling. So because you all seem really interested in it based on that poll, I thought I would get into it. Now, I typically, when I do these kind of chatty videos, I like to apply my makeup while I'm doing it, but I'm not going to do that today for a couple of reasons. First, it is very hard to talk and do my makeup at the same time. So because this is a topic that I really want to be, you know, very clear in my thoughts and opinions on it, I don't want to be too distracted by trying to blend some eyeshadow and then say something that I didn't really mean or say it in a way that I didn't mean to say it. So I want to be able to, you know, focus and say what I want to say, how I want to say it. Secondly, I do want to insert pictures throughout this video because I want to actually give you guys visual examples of what I'm talking about. So that would be really hard to do if I was applying my makeup. So that's why I'm not doing my face, but I did film this look in case you were curious. This is the new Nomad palette, so it will either be up before this one or coming very, very soon. And then a couple other things before we actually get into the meat of this video. So I did take some notes because I want to make sure that I hit all of the points that I need to hit. So I do have my phone here, so if you see me looking this way, I just want to make sure that I'm hitting all of the points, and I want to get into a couple of disclaimers, which I have written down. So first and foremost, I have nothing against private labeling. I just want to put it out there. I'm not doing this video to be vindictive or mean or to like bash private labeling in any way. I have no like qualms about it. I have nothing against it. I really am not that vested in it, to be quite honest. Secondly, I pride myself on having my channel be sort of a safe space for discourse. Like, I want us to be able to talk about these things that might be slightly controversial, might be one where there are polarizing opinions, just like have a constructive conversation about things like this. So at the end of the day, I don't expect all of us to agree, and that is completely fine, but I expect all of us to be respectful. I expect that in the comments, people are going to give their opinions, disagree with folks, but it's not going to turn nasty. It's not going to turn into a big hullabaloo, because this ain't the place for that at all, in case you were wondering. Thirdly, I have no background in finance or marketing or business in any way whatsoever. That is not my expertise. I have no formal training in it. So I am not coming at this from a perspective of someone that has an MBA or any kind of title that can talk to it in that way. I'm coming at this from the perspective of a consumer, as someone who has purchased a lot of products, specifically makeup products, and has begun to kind of see some of the patterns that are emerging. So again, not an expert. Do your own research and find people that are experts, essentially. And in that same vein, I'm also not someone that has ever started a brand, has ever owned a brand, has ever owned a business. So again, don't have that level of expertise. This is just my opinions. This is just how I feel about it, having been in this space for several years now and having experienced and seen some things. So I hope that gives you guys a little bit of context, and we can dive into the video, which I have tried to split up into a couple different parts so that I could understand and kind of like follow and so things can flow and follow through really easily. And I will include some timestamps down below, so if you want to jump around and hit specific pieces, you can do that. So the way in which I have this video laid out is that I want to start by, you know, first defining what is private labeling. I will give you guys a standard definition. I will give you what I think it is from sort of my understanding of what that definition is. And then I want to dive into some pros and cons of private labeling, as well as some facts and fiction about private labeling. And after that, I want to dive into some examples, talking about specific brands. You all know here on this channel, I have no brand loyalty, and I have no issues calling out brands by name. I see no reason to try to protect brands, because brands are businesses, they're not people. So I'm gonna give you guys some examples from what I have seen and from what I kind of know being in this space. And then lastly, I want to talk about how do we protect ourselves as consumers. And I'm not saying protect ourselves in the way of like, oh, private labeling is terrible, we need to, you know, protect ourselves. It's just that makeup is expensive. The beauty community is a very expensive community to be in. I've said this before, makeup is a very, very expensive hobby. And when you are investing a lot of your hard-earned money into this hobby, you want to make sure that you're purchasing things that are not exorbitantly priced. You want to make sure that you are investing in things that are worth what you're spending. And you want to make sure that you're buying things, you're not buying duplicates of a lot of things. So I want to sort of end with a couple of sort of tips and tricks in that space. So that's going to be my layout for today's video. I'm going to try to stay on track as much as possible, but let's go ahead and dive in. So like I said, I want to start off with what is private labeling. So I just did like a basic Google of what is private labeling, and the first sort of descriptor that I found was from Shopify. And they do have an entire article that talks about what is private labeling, how does it work, how can you get to private labeling companies, how can you order, all that stuff. But I just wanted to focus on the definition. So Shopify says that private labeling is when a manufacturer creates products that are sold exclusively by a third party under a different brand name. Private labeling allows the retailer to outsource the production of goods to the manufacturer and sell high quality products at scale. The private label business continues to grow increasingly popular among those looking to start an e-commerce business. So that is their like very lengthy, wordy sort of description of what private labeling is. Here's how I understand it. And to break it down into like the basic of basic terms. So private labeling is essentially you have a large company that produces a product or several products in mass, and then they sell it to other companies because they are producing this product in mass without any branding attached to it. And then they sell it to other companies who add their logo to it and then sell it at a markup, sell it at whatever price they decide to sell it. So at the end of the day, these companies that are producing these products in mass are selling it to multiple different brands that sell the same thing, and you may not know that you're getting the same product because the packaging looks a little bit different. There's a different brand name on it. And I think that this has gotten a lot of attention in the beauty space because it is something that we are seeing a lot of recently, because there are very small indie brands, independently owned brands that are popping up and that have very similar formulas, right? So I think a lot of people started really catching on to that, but it is actually not something that exists only within the beauty space. In doing some of my little Googling, what I found was that private labeling is very common in clothing, it's common in food, again, beauty, retail, nail polish, all of those things. So it's not just specific to makeup. And I don't know if anybody that's watching this actually watches Real Housewives of Atlanta, but there was a big hullabaloo last season when Sheree actually was selling these sort of matching jogger sets at like, I think it was like over $100, and people found the exact same set of joggers on Shein for like $24.99 or something like that. If I can find the picture, I will insert it here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And it was a big like hullabaloo because the price that she was charging for her product, which is essentially the same quality, the same material, just with her logo on it, versus what Shein was charging, was just like wildly different. And that is, you know, where a lot of the controversy with private labeling comes from. Now, the other thing too that I understand with private labeling is that there are kind of levels to this, right? So with private labeling, like I said, it's a company that mass produces a product and then they sell it. Now, specific to the beauty industry, the way in which that could work is that that company could mass produce a palette. Like, let's say we're talking about eyeshadows. They can mass produce an eyeshadow palette, or they can mass produce singles. And you, as the business owner, can purchase the pre-made palette and sell it as is without making any changes except for the branding. Or you can purchase multiple singles and then curate a palette around that. So there are and that's why I say there are levels to it, because I think there's the easy sort of like, oh, well, this is already made, I just have to slap a logo on it and go, versus, you know, I like this shade and I like this shade, let me put these color combinations together and see how it works. And also you could choose shades from different companies. Like, you don't have to buy from the same private label company throughout. So let's say you like the mattes from this private label company, then you purchase the mattes from there. You like the shimmers or the metallics from this one. You like the multichromes from this one. And then you can sort of build and curate your collection based on what you want it to look like. So again, the way I see it is that there are levels to private labeling. The easy, just like pre-made, slap a logo on it, or you can actually curate things the way in which you want it to. The big thing about private labeling is that it is not a unique formula. You, as the business owner, you don't get a chance to go into the lab and tell them, I need you to tweak this formula to make it more creamy. I want you to add a little bit of this, take a little bit of that out. There's none of that we're used to, or that, you know, we expect, or we think, or we have some sort of like assumption that brands are doing, that they're in a lab, you know, adding specific ingredients and taking specific ingredients out. And that's just not what happens with private labeling, because like I said, it's sort of these mass-produced products. So now that we've kind of like gone through the what is private labeling part of it, let's dive into the pros and cons of private labeling. And I think the first and the most important pro of private labeling is that it literally makes it possible for anybody to start a business. Like, little old me can just wake up in one day and be like, you know what? I want to start an eyeshadow business, or I want to start selling clothes. Like, it makes it possible for me to do that, because what we have to realize is that not everybody's Rihanna, not everybody is Selena Gomez, not everybody's Ariana Grande. Most people do not have the capital that it needs to create a completely unique formula from scratch. Most people cannot just go in and come up with 50 foundations. Like, that's just not possible in the grand scheme of things. Riri could do it because Riri had Riri money. But for a regular old, you know, middle class, lower class, you know, person who does not have millions sitting in the bank, it is very hard to start a business, and this makes it possible for anybody to do so. And the reality is that while private labeling is becoming a little bit more of a it's becoming a more popular topic now, I think we sometimes forget that some of those big brands that exist now, some of those brands that were faves, started with private labeling. Like Morphe, if you remember Morphe, when it was Morphe brushes, those were private labeled brushes. So there are a lot of brands that are sort of like killing the game now that started off as these small brands with private labeled formulas, and as they grew in success, they were able to take that money and invest it into more unique formulas, which is what it's supposed to be, right? You start off with what is available, what you can get easily, and then once you have the money and the backing and sort of the success behind you, you can then start creating a formula that is unique to you to go forward. Some other pros to private labeling is that, you know, there are a variety of these large factories that create private label formulas. So I know I talk about, well, they all have the same formula, but it's not necessarily true, because there isn't just one factory or just one website that people are going to purchase eyeshadows to create their palettes, right? There are a number of different private labeled formulas, and as I have been testing a ton of new brands and a ton of indie brands, I'm beginning to pick up on the different formulas that are like those, in my opinion, that might be those sort of private labeled formulas. So it does create a lot of variety, and it does, it's not necessarily just one product being, or one formula being pushed. And I will say that, in my opinion, a lot of these private label formulas are pretty high quality. So you're not necessarily getting like bad products by any means. And then I think the last pro that I want to point out when it comes to private labeling is that it actually, in my opinion, creates more consumer choice. I don't know what it is, but in the last like 3 to 5 years, everybody and their mother wanted to start a beauty business. And I think part of that is because they have seen how lucrative the beauty community is, because there are such huge margins when it comes to makeup and skincare products, where like, we know these brands are making these products for significantly less than what they're charging. And I think because of that, a lot of people are seeing that, like, opportunity for huge profits and trying to get in on it. And because it's not just, you know, these large celebrities that are getting in on it, it's like, again, anybody who wants to start a brand coming up with these indie brands. We're seeing a ton of these brands on the market, and it is creating a lot of consumer choice. And that's why I try to encourage you guys, when you're looking at some of these like all shimmer palettes or these all duochrome or multichrome palettes, shop around, because I have seen some of these palettes go for $75, $85 on one brand and then be $25, $35 on another brand. So, like, you can see how wildly different those prices are. And I think that because we're seeing more and more brands pop up and a lot of them have the same formula, it does give us a lot of consumer choice. We can shop around to make sure that we're finding the best price. And it's also forcing a lot of these brands to have a lot of sales. Like, it just is what it is, because there are too many products being released. People can't buy it all. People are usually enticed by sales. So these brands are coming up with a lot of sales so that we can purchase things. So that's, in my opinion, those are what the pros are. So let's talk about the cons. And I think, one of the biggest cons is the price. So even though we have a lot of consumer choice, one of the biggest cons, in my opinion, when it comes to private labeling is the price. And that is because the margins are insane. And because it is very easy for anyone to start a brand and private label, you can literally go onto these websites like AliExpress and Alibaba and see the price of these shadows. And I have done that. And I have seen some shades go for 88 cents. So when you as a consumer are looking at these private label sites where you can buy these products in bulk, and you are seeing a shadow that looks suspiciously familiar for 88 cents, and you do in the math, and it's like, okay, it's a 9-pan palette, that's less than $9. Why are you charging $34.99? So, and there's no regulation. There's literally nothing that says that they can't charge more than a certain price or less than a certain price. So the margins in which people are selling these products for, in my opinion, are just ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. And I think that's one of the biggest cons of private labeling, is that honestly you're not sure if you're getting something that's worth the price, or if you're just getting bamboozled and hoodwinked into purchasing something that they paid pennies for, you know? And the other con too with private labeling is that because it is typically done by these sort of independently small owned brands, it is very hard to tell if a product is private labeled until you actually get that product, put it on your eyes, and you realize, I have this shadow, I have this shade, this is the exact same thing. And brands just don't disclose that they're using private label products. Personally, I'm at the point where I go into purchasing from indie brands with the expectation that it is private labeled. Like, I think every single one of these smaller indie brands are private labeled. Just every single one. That's kind of how I feel about it. And most brands don't disclose. I have literally only heard of one brand, and that I believe is It's Belle Cosmetics, actually coming out and saying, we use private label formulas, right? And that being said, even if a brand does come out and say we're using a private label formula, you don't know which one. So you don't know if this is the same, if they all got it from AliExpress, or if they all got it from this one website, because there's so many different types of formulas that you can pick from these websites that you just don't know until you actually get it in your hands. And for a lot of us, we don't want to take that risk, because when it comes to these smaller indie brands, usually you can't just return things. This ain't Sephora, this ain't Ulta. It can't just be like, well, you know what? I realize this is a private label formula. I don't want it. Let me just take it back, because that typically does not happen. So because, you know, it is typically very pricey. Makeup is just very pricey in general. And you don't know, because brands are not disclosing. It's hard to tell solely from pictures. You end up purchasing things and it just ends up being like, it could end up being a huge waste of your money. And in this economy, none of us want to waste money. And as we are in such an oversaturated beauty space right now, where we have so many indie brands and you want to try this because it looks new, it looks exciting, there's the likelihood of getting things that are just the same is very, very high. Okay, let's talk about fact versus fiction, because I think that there are a lot of myths and misconceptions when it comes to private labeling that I just want to talk about from my perspective and as I understand it. And I'm being very, very specific when I say as I understand it. Like, I don't want you all to think that I'm sitting here saying this is the truth and my word is the word. This is just my personal understanding. So please don't get mad at me if your understanding is different. Again, let us educate and be, you know, cordial in the comments. So, facts versus fiction. So the first statement that I have here is, if you're getting a private labeled product, it's bad quality. And that, I think, is absolute fiction. I don't think that just because something is private labeled means that it's bad. Like, I don't believe that at all, because looking at all of the indie products that I have, like I said, I'm pretty sure most, if not all, of my very small indie products are private labeled, and there are some that I love, just hands down, I'm obsessed with. Like, I don't, unless it's like Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona, where I feel like they are actually in the lab working on formulas, I think all of these products are just private labeled. And again, I love a lot of them and use them quite consistently. The second statement that I have is that there's a huge difference or margin in the cost of private label products. And with that, I will say that that is a fact. I do think that there's a huge difference in the margins. But I will also add that it kind of depends, because I do think that there are some brands that are fair when it comes to pricing their products. And then there are some brands that are extremely outrageous. Now, I know you hear me say that, you know, you can purchase some of these things for $1, less than $1. So, like, you know, the math ain't mathin'. But I think we have to think past the actual cost of the shadow, because there is yes, the shadow costs $1, but then we have to also take into account what it costs to design the packaging, because obviously they have to put their brand and their logo on it. So they have to design the outer packaging, which takes time. They have to ship things out. They have to advertise. You know, they're running a business. There's the overhead cost that's associated with running a business, which includes all of those, like shipping, branding, marketing, all of those things and more that I don't know because I'm not a business or finance person. And all of that has to get built into the cost of this product that they're selling, right? So while I think that they're not going to sell it to us at a 1-to-1 ratio where, like, we built this palette for $9, we're going to sell it to you for $9. It's like, we built this palette for $9. It cost us X amount. It took us X amount of hours of work to do, you know, what it needed to launch this. So that is built into the cost. But even with building, you know, that business thing into the cost, personally, I still feel like there's a lot of price gouging that happens in the indie market where things are just exorbitantly priced. And I do think that there are some brands that are, like I said, more on the reasonable side where I'm like, okay, this seems fair. But there are a lot of brands that are charging insane amounts of amounts for these products that they know they didn't pay that much for. They know they didn't put that much work into, because let's be real, not every indie brand puts a lot into the packaging and design and the marketing. Like, I think about brands like Nomad Cosmetics and Adept, right? Like, when you look at Nomad's palettes, you know, the outer packaging, the theme, everything that goes into a release, it is so well thought out. And you see the vision and the collection and everything that went into making that a reality. And then sometimes I look at other indie brands and it looks like clip art that they just plopped onto a palette. And it's like, that is ugly. No shade, but like, I think there are different levels of effort that get put into the final products of these brands, just saying. So the third statement is, it's difficult to tell whether a product is private labeled and if you already have it in your collection. And I think that's a fact. I think it's really hard. I think it's a guessing game. And at the end of the day, you are taking a chance. You can look at something online and, you know, nowadays there's usually a filter on something. The contrast has been edited. The saturation has been tweaked. All of those things brands are doing to entice you to buy. So a lot of times you might think it's private label or you might think it's not. And then when you get it, it's like completely different. So you are taking a chance every time you buy it. And you're like, I hope I don't have this, you know? So it is very difficult to tell if it's private labeled, in my opinion. And like I said, brands don't disclose, and you might also see similar products from different private label companies. You know what I mean? Like you might get a multi-chrome from this one company, and you might get a similar multi-chrome with like the same shift from another company, and technically they're different because they're two different private labeling companies, but at the end of the day you have the same shade. You know what I mean? So that's how I feel. The fourth statement that I have is you can tell if it's private label if it's made in China. Honestly, that is a complete fiction. It doesn't matter. Like, it just because a palette is made in China does not mean that it's private labeled. It could be made in Italy, it could be made in France, it could be made in the USA. There's really no way to say that a product is private labeled just by looking at where it's made. And that's that. And the last statement I have is many of the large brands we know now started as private labeled companies or products. And yes, that is a complete fact. Like I mentioned, Morphe used to be Morphe brushes. They had private labeled brushes, and now they are, well, they were a multi-billion-dollar company. I think they had a $2 billion evaluation, but now they're bankrupt. So, but that's for a whole other reason. I don't think being private labeled bankrupt Morphe, but you know, they are the most prominent one that I know of that had started in the private labeling space, but I'm positive that there are others that started there and are now creating their own formulas and doing better. Okay, so we went through the facts and the fiction, the pros and the cons. Next section, I want to talk about examples. I want to actually tell you guys about brands that I think are using private labeled formulas or have just very similar formulas that is kind of eerie. I have no proof, like I said. These are all my guesstimates, so take it however you want to take it. I'm going to scooch a little bit because I do want to insert some pictures, because I think sometimes you can kind of tell the similarities in these brands and their products because the textures of the shadows might look the same. So I want to insert some pictures so you can see and basically just judge for yourself. So I kind of grouped these into groups by formula because, like I said, there are multiple private label formulas and not every brand is using the same one. So I think that there are some that are using the same and others that are using other ones. So the first group that I have is Give Me Glow and Clarity Cosmetics. I have heard from several people at this point that they have a very similar formula, particularly in their matte shadows. It's actually one of the reasons why I have not purchased the Clarity Cosmetics palettes, because I did not like the Give Me Glow matte formula, and I knew that if I didn't like it, there's a high likelihood that I wouldn't like the Clarity formula because apparently it might be the same, in my opinion. And I think the other thing too with Clarity and Give Me Glow is that they both have those very large, giant pans that I absolutely hate. So I've always wondered if they are using the same formula. That is just sort of like the first group that I was like, I wonder. Because they do have a very similar vibe, in my opinion. The second group that came to mind for me were these two brands, Ace Beauty and Glamlight. And I think the OG Glamlight formula. Now, when I first tried Glamlight, they had superb mattes and a really nice kind of putty-ish shimmer formula. And I really enjoyed the Glamlight formula. And then I actually just recently got, and I'm saying recently, but it was last year, I got the Ace Beauty Paletopoly palette. And I tried it, and I was like, this feels familiar. And I really feel like the shimmers in that Paletopoly palette felt very, very familiar to the shimmers that I tried from Glamlight. The mattes, not so much, because I did feel like they were more pigments than anything else. Like, they packed a little bit more punch than I expected them to. They blended beautifully, which, you know, the Glamlight ones did as well. But it was the shimmers that made me pause, because I was like, this feels very familiar. Now, Glamlight has since come out with a new formula. It's in their Scooby-Doo palettes. I don't know if that's going to be their formula going forward, but they did say this was their sort of newish formula. So I don't know if they're going to have just that new formula going forward, or they're going to use both. And I feel like if they do continue with the new formula, that might be an example of a brand that started with, you know, the putty-like formula that might be private labeled, and it can now elevate their formula because they have seen pretty good success in their business, and now they can tweak and add and come up with more unique formulas. Maybe. I don't know. That's just my guess. And then the third group is the group that I think is the largest when it comes to the private label space. You know, these are the brands that I think pretty much share the same formula, in my opinion. So when I look at, you know, like Sugar Drizzle Cosmetics, Simply Posh Cosmetics, It's Belle Cosmetics, Saints Angel Sinners Cosmetics, NBA Cosmetics, Pink Crush Cosmetics, even Fantasy Cosmetica, Ensley Rain Cosmetics, Bella Beauty Bath, Micah Beauty Shop, Ladybugglow, and I think some of the earlier unearthly / alien cosmetics. When I look at all of those brands, and hopefully you should see some of those palettes rotating through, pictures of them rotating through here, and I look at the textures of like the shadows in those palettes, it all looks very familiar. And a lot of these brands that I just mentioned, they do the thing where they release all multi-chrome or all duochrome palettes, and it's like, okay, this looks familiar. And I think a lot of them do that. So like I just feel like that entire group, for me, what I have like resigned myself to do is just pick one brand from that group, and that's going to be my brand going forward. Which one has the best price, which one I think has the best color curation, and which one I feel the most comfortable supporting, because I do think that there are definite duplicates within that brand. And I've even found one. I remember I was swatching a shade from my Fantasy Cosmetica palette, and then I swatched a shade from my Pink Crush Cosmetica palette, and I was like, this is the exact same shadow. I can't prove it because you probably need to do like some testing, but I would be willing to bet money that it was the exact same shadow, the exact same formula. So, you know, like having both palettes and then realizing, damn, I already have that shade, I've like resigned myself that for that group of brands, I'm just like, you know what, I like this brand because I think they have good color curations, or I think that they respond well to customer service, they don't have long pre-orders, and that's the one that I'm going with. And then I have like a probably but I don't know kind of category, because I think that, like I said, most if not all indie brands, especially these smaller ones that are very independently owned, they run their own e-commerce sites, they're not in Sephora or Ulta or Camerezi Cosmetics. I think that, you know, they're all using private label formulas. That's just my opinion. Now, if you want to know if there's any safe brands, I could think of two. The first safe brand that I want to mention is Pretties For Your Face. And Pretties For Your Face is a brand that I 100% believe is safe because they are hand-pressed, handmade shadows. Like, when you get a Pretties For Your Face like order, you can see that each shadow looks different. There are a lot of imperfections in each because the owner is like literally making these shades by hand and creating custom shades. And I also know that they're creating custom shades because as someone who has an affiliate code with the brand, they will oftentimes like pick a creator that they that's in the affiliate program and work with them to create a shade. I created a shade called Trinbago, and I remember the owner sending me samples of like, oh, like this is the shade, like what do you think about this? And I would respond with like, is it possible to get it to look more like this? So I know that that is not like them just buying a bunch of shades and selling it. The other brand that I think is safe is Notoriously Morbid. Now they are coming up with a mass production brand called Spellcast, but the OG Notoriously Morbid was hand-pressed, handmade products, and they have said that they're going to continue with their handmade, hand-pressed side of things, so I'm looking forward to see how that goes. But from having used their products, you could tell that it's not like a mass production kind of thing, and I really enjoyed like how unique and different theirs feel. And so those are the two brands that I think are just like unique and different in this space. Okay, so now that we talked about brands, I want to talk about how we can protect ourselves when we are shopping. You know, sort of tips to avoid having duplicates in your collection, to avoid like the crazy price gouging, so that you don't like end up bamboozled and hoodwinked out here in these streets. Some of these are going to be just really broad and general and like, you know it, but I think it's worth seeing anyway. Okay, so first and foremost, check your collection. And I think that this goes for pretty much anything that you're purchasing. If you are watching my channel, I assume that you have a large makeup collection, or you're really into makeup like I am, and you probably have more makeup than you need. So like for most purchases, you should be checking your collection to see, is this redundant? Do I already have it? Do I need it? Do I really want it? And I think when it comes to indie brands specifically, I think it's really important to do a double check, because you want to make sure that it doesn't look too familiar to what you already have in your collection, because then you end up with duplicates and it's never a great idea. Second tip I have is pay close attention to textures. I know I mentioned that a lot of these brands will have sort of these filters and all these other things on there that can make things look different than what they actually are. But I do think sometimes you can actually see the textures in the pictures depending on how it's, you know, displayed. And you can see when something looks familiar. You can see when it's like, I feel like I have that. So just pay close attention to the pictures that brands post, and pay close attention to the textures that exist. Look for swatches, because that's also really helpful when you are looking to see if you have that shade already. Third tip, be extra careful, in my opinion, when it comes to these all shimmer palettes. I think that those are the biggest offenders for me, is that when these brands release these all multi-chrome, all duochrome palettes, chances are you have a lot of those shades. Personally, I believe if once you buy one of those all multi-chrome palettes, especially if it's like a 15, 18 pan of those all shimmer palettes, you have it all. So when I see brands releasing a ton of these like all shimmer palettes, all duochrome palettes, you don't need them. Like, I know that It's Belle has several of them. I believe Gourmand Girls has a couple of them as well. I know Adept not Adept Cosmetics. Well, I think OG Adept might have had some private label formulas. But I was talking about Alien Cosmetics, now Unearthly Cosmetics. Remember when they had the All I Ever Wanted Volume 1 and Volume 2? Like, you had all the shades that you needed there. Pink Crush Cosmetics has an all shimmer palette as well. So all of those all shimmer palettes, I started to realize that I didn't need any of them. I had too much. There were a lot of duplicates. It was not gonna work. So I just say be careful with the all shimmer palettes. And honestly, if you're buying an all shimmer palette, really think about it. Do you actually use that? Because for me, what I know is that when it comes to palettes, I like to have mattes. I personally am not a huge fan of reaching into other palettes for mattes. Don't get me wrong, I'll do it. Like, I will go for my Blend Bunny mattes any day, and I usually have to when I can't make the mattes from the palette work. But generally speaking, I like to use palettes where I don't have to like get mattes from somewhere else. So if you don't like all shimmer palettes, just avoid it completely. Just saying. The next thing that I have is consider the individual or the individuals behind the brand. And let me explain what I mean by that, because like I said at the beginning, one of the best things about the private labeling option is that anybody could start a brand. Anybody could wake up today, tomorrow, and decide that they want to create eyeshadow palettes. But what I have found is that the brands that are backed or run by, you know, people that are makeup artists or people that have that sort of creative spirit or mindset are the ones that intrigue me the most. Putting together colors is not my ministry. I am not artistic by any means. I don't have the visual foresight to build a palette. That's why I don't do build a palette videos on my channel, because I can't. I am just not that person. So for me, I like, you know, shopping from others, because I like seeing how they have curated palettes, how they have picked individual mattes to match with specific shimmers to create a palette, and to see that color story come to life. So when I think about like shopping from these brands, what I realize is that there are some that will just slap a ton of shades together and it's like, here's a palette, whereas others will curate a color story that makes sense. Like, I think about the Adept Cosmetics Arrow release and their House of Elle release. You know, it was tied to Superman, tied to Green Arrow, and you could see the thoughts behind each shade and how it was paired together. Blend Bunny, the owner of Blend Bunny is a makeup artist, and you can tell that the way in which they have curated their palettes, where there's a very clear gradient of the mattes and shimmers that pair perfectly with the matte set. It was extremely well thought out. Nomad Cosmetics, they do like the best job I've ever seen in terms of creating, you know, identifying a destination and creating an entire story behind it and an entire color scheme. And, you know, part of the reason why I sold my my Alien Cosmetics All I Ever Wanted palette is that when I look at it, it is a bunch of duochrome shades just thrown into a palette. I didn't see a curated color story, in my opinion. And sometimes when I look at these palettes from these indie brands, it doesn't feel curated. It feels incohesive. Fantasy Cosmetica is another one that I think does a really good job at putting these palettes together, because they do 9-pan palettes, and it's really, in my opinion, hard to create a 9-pan palette with a lot of versatility. Sometimes I'll see brands do it and it's either very monochromatic or very duochromatic, and I think that they do a really good job at creating 9-pan palettes that have a lot of versatility. So I think that, you know, just think about who is behind the brand, you know, think about how they're putting these palettes together. Is there a story? Is it like cohesive, or does it feel kind of chaotic and not very pulled together well? And I think that could be really helpful in thinking about how you decide which brand to purchase from. And then lastly, take it on a palette by palette basis. Like, I don't want to say write off a brand completely, because you might see one palette from the brand and you're like, that is it, that is my palette, I absolutely love it. So it's not like I'm saying, you know, don't buy from any of these indie brands or don't buy from this one specific brand. Just be more thoughtful with each individual purchase so that you don't end up wasting money. Because when I was really into the indie space, I was buying everything that came out, like gimme, 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 gimme. And that did not bode well for me, and I have decluttered a lot of my indie palettes that just don't serve me. So just take it on a you know, day by day basis, and just be really thoughtful and intentional with the purchases, and it will really help to ensure that you're not wasting your money. So that was going to be the last thing that I wanted to say, but I did want to quickly address the issue with, not even issue, I don't know what to call it. I want to quickly address whatever happened with Ladybugglow and their second release. First and foremost, I don't know the brand. I don't know the brand owner. I don't know them from a hole in the wall. And I have no, like, dog in this fight or anything at all. I just wanted to share my perspective of what happened, because I know a number of you guys also, I asked you guys how you felt about private labeling, and I'll share some of that too, because I really appreciated getting your responses. But basically, Ladybugglow, they are a brand new indie brand to the space. They released their first palette, which I thought was really well curated and well thought out. They did like these reveals, and it felt like it was a palette that they put a lot of thought into putting together. And then their second release was this sort of pastel palette that my friend Steven and a number of other creators found on Amazon for like half of what the brand was charging. And I think after that, it just got really ugly in terms of Steven being accused of being ableist and trying to destroy the brand and not calling out other brands like Odin's Eye, because the Odin's Eye singles look suspiciously familiar to some things I've seen on these private label sites. There were a lot of like hateful comments I saw being directed specifically at Steven. Now the brand owner says that they received hateful comments as well. I didn't see any of that, so I don't know what they're talking about, but if there were, I don't think hate should be going in any direction. I think as a consumer, Steven had every right to say how he felt about it, because to see a palette that is available on Amazon being sold for double the amount, and the only difference is the cover has changed, that would rub me the wrong way. And personally, I feel like when it comes to private labeling, I think brands that choose to do that should be doing it in a way where they select individual shades and individual formulas, and they curate a palette that makes sense for them. They curate a palette based on the color story. To just purchase a palette that has already been curated and put together and to just slap your label on it, in my opinion, is intellectually lazy. I think it is extremely lazy. And I'm not mincing my words, because I want to be very clear on it. And I feel like because Steven expressed his disdain or whatever you want to call it for the brand releasing it in that way, it did not make them ableist. Quite frankly, the brand owners' demographic background and identities are irrelevant to this entire situation. And one of the things I always say when it comes to my channel and engaging with brands is that brands are businesses, period. Yes, they're run by people, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And we should all have grace when it comes to indie brands because they don't have the same staff or investment that Urban Decay and NARS have behind them. So yes, we know that it's going to take longer. We know that they may not be the most responsive customer service or any of that stuff. But at the end of the day, if you are putting your hard-earned money into anything at all, as a consumer, you have a right to say what you want, how you want, when you want. And that is what it is. And to be able to say it without being accused of being ableist, sexist, racist, any of those things, because that's absolutely ridiculous. People are allowed to disagree with you for the sheer fact that they disagree. That's just what it is. Now, I wish absolutely no harm on this woman and her business. I hope she succeeds. I hope everyone that starts a business succeeds. But just because the brand is independently owned, just because the owner might be a nice person, it does not make them immune to criticism. And I think that the criticism that Steven and others provided was absolutely fair. It was absolutely fair, in my opinion. And that's that on that. Now, I do want to share some of the comments that you guys said in my Instagram poll because I really like hearing you guys' thoughts on it. So I'm just going to read a couple of them and just kind of react to them. So the first one that I have is, if they don't want it compared, don't sell the same palette. Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to sell a palette that's pre-made and it's easy to find on Amazon, people are going to compare it. Like what do you expect? Come on. The next one is, I think every consumer should have a choice and know it's private labeled. Also, shame on that owner for attacking someone on the internet for an opinion. That's fair. That is fair because Steven did post and share that the owner actually was in their DMs calling them ableist and not being very nice. And he has received a lot of hateful comments since then, which I don't think is warranted. Granted, the owner themselves are saying that they're receiving hate. I haven't seen the hate. So if somebody want to point me to the hate, I am happy to be like, you know what? Yes, they're also receiving hate. But all I have seen is criticism that is like, well, this seems a little shady. So, and I think criticism and hate are two very different things and we should not conflate the two. Okay. Next one that I have is, I don't want a copy and paste of an AliExpress product. Switch it up at least. Yeah, I think it is intellectually lazy. I think that if you want to create a product, pick the shades. I want to see your vision. I want to see what your mind can put together from like a blank canvas and just a bunch of single shadows. You know, like, show me what you see. Don't just show me what somebody else has made. The next one is, I don't mind it. I think it is a great way for small brands to start out. Just don't overprice it or lie about it. I think that's a really important comment. Don't overprice, don't lie about it. Like, and a lot of these brands are overpricing their products and lying about it. Next comment I have is, to each their own, but be honest about business practices when asked. Yep. Someone said, it feels a bit like cheating. It does. And I think it does, especially when it is a copy and paste palette. I think it feels less like cheating when it's a curated color story because, like, that palette didn't exist before. You made that palette, so. Someone said it's getting overwhelming as a consumer in an already oversaturated market. I agree. Like I said, anybody can start a brand because it's very easy and it is very cost effective to shop these private labeled companies. But that being said, it is excessive when there's a new indie brand popping up every other week. Okay. As long as you're honest about it, as long as they're honest about what they're doing, I don't see a problem. I think a lot of people just want transparency. That was the theme that I got from these comments, and I think it's fair. Transparency. Just be transparent. I think that if beauty brands use private labeling, they should be upfront and honest about it. Yep. I think private labeling has been normalized to a point that it is unsustainable and leads to a lot of bad brands. Okay. This next comment is long, but I think it's important. I feel like at this point in time as a consumer, I'm less willing to take a chance on smaller indie brands, especially considering I could most likely get the same product from somewhere else for a fraction of the price. I've seen 2 examples of this in the past few days. A household has bills of nearly $400 a month, and the prices for food are ridiculous. It comes down to what I have to pay for necessities versus what I'm willing to pay for makeup that I don't need. Yep, and I think that's an important point that I don't know if brands are even thinking about this, but like, I think we are consistently hearing in the community that people are investing their money into other things, and eggs is $8, okay? I don't even know what else to say, but eggs is $8. And the price of the necessities versus makeup, it just not added up. So people are going to invest their money into other things. That's just what it is. Now, the comment does go on to say, I realize some of the people starting these brands are also in a tight financial spot. Why would they be in business otherwise? Why wouldn't they buy cheap private label products, do a bit of work on them to make it their own and upsell them? And I think that's a fair point. It does, every time I see a new brand pop up, I do wonder if the individual starting the brand is really interested and invested in makeup and really wanted to start a makeup company, or if they saw the profits to be made and was like, well, let me jump on this money train. I do wonder that sometimes, because I think there's so much profit to be made. However, I do think the amount of profit that could be made is becoming smaller and smaller, because as the market gets oversaturated, you know, you're fighting for consumers. It's more brands fighting for the same consumers. So, but I really thought that was a great point. It also goes on to say, I'm far from being a business person, but this makes some sense to me. What I'm seeing that's bothering me is consumers being exposed to these products which are being marketed as new and unique when they really are not. Yep, couldn't agree more. Okay, so this video is already like an hour long, and I knew it was gonna be long. And I really want to hear you guys' comments. This should hopefully be a premiere, so hopefully we've been chatting in the chat about this. But if you are watching this, like not during the premiere, please leave your comments down below. I really want to hear your perspective and your thoughts on private labeling. Like, let me know, do you think brands should just fully disclose it? Should it be on their website? Do you not care? Do you think that it's shady? I want to hear all of it down in the comments below. I'm gonna say it one more time. Please be respectful. And I'm saying please. Like, I'm saying please. But I'm also saying this in the place. Don't come here with the bullshit. Please and thank you. Be respectful. We can have discourse. We are adults, and you gonna act like it in my comment section. Thank you. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this provided a little bit of context for the folks that aren't very familiar with private labeling. And I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts about private labeling. Depending on what the comments are, I might do a part 2 to this. We'll see, maybe a live. But yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with me for a little bit. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. And I look forward to reading the comments later, and I'll catch you in my next one.